Russia has tens of thousands of troops near Ukraine and has demanded security guarantees from the West, including a promise that they will never admit Ukraine into NATO. But Secretary of State Antony Blinken categorically rejected the demands of Russia that Ukraine, Georgia, and other countries cannot be permanently barred from joining the NATO alliance. US President Joe Biden said that there were no plans to send US troops to Ukraine, which is not a NATO member, but said he would consider imposing direct sanctions on Putin and that there would be enormous consequences if Russia were to invade.
There is no doubt, let there be no doubt at all, that if Putin makes this choice, Russia will pay a heavy price.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson urged European allies to be ready to deploy sanctions as soon as there was an incursion. Let's look at the background of this issue. The crisis in Ukraine began with protests in the capital city of Kiev in November 2013 against Ukrainian President Viktor's decision to reject a deal for greater economic integration with the European Union. After a violent crackdown by the state security forces unintentionally drew an even greater number of protesters and escalated the conflict, President Viktor fled the country in February 2014. In March 2014, Russian troops took control of Ukraine's Crimean region before formally annexing the peninsula after Crimeans voted to join the Russian Federation in a disputed local referendum. Russian President Vladimir Putin cited the need to protect the rights of Russian citizens and Russian speakers in Crimea and southeast Ukraine. The crisis heightened ethnic deviance, and 2 months later, pro-Russian separatists in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of eastern Ukraine held a referendum to declare independence from Ukraine. Violence in eastern Ukraine between Russian-backed separatist forces and the Ukrainian military has killed more than 10,000 people since April 2014. In July 2014, the situation in Ukraine escalated into an international crisis and put the United States and the European Union at odds with Russia when a Malaysian Airlines flight was shot down over Ukrainian airspace, killing all 298 on board. Dutch air accident investigators concluded in October 2015 that the plane had been downed by a Russian-built surface-to-air missile. In September 2016, investigators said that the missile system was provided by Russia, determining it was moved into eastern Ukraine and then back to Russian territory following the downing of the airplane. Since February 2015, France, Germany, Russia and Ukraine have attempted to broker a cessation in violence through the Minsk Accords. The agreement includes provisions for a ceasefire, withdrawal of heavy weaponry, and full Ukrainian government control throughout the conflict zone. However, efforts to reach a diplomatic settlement and satisfactory resolution have been unsuccessful. In April 2016, NATO announced that the alliance would deploy 4 battalions to Eastern Europe, rotating troops through Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland to deter possible future Russian aggression elsewhere in Europe, particularly in the Baltics. These battalions were joined by 2 US Army tank brigades deployed to Poland in September 2017 to further bolster the alliance deterrence presence. Ukraine has been the target of a number of cyber attacks since the conflict started in 2014. In December 2015, more than 200,000 people lost power across Ukraine in an attack, and in December 2016, parts of Kiev experienced another power blackout following a similar attack targeting a Ukrainian utility company. In June 2017, government and business computer systems in Ukraine were hit by the NotPetya cyber attack by Russia that was spread to computer systems worldwide and caused billions of dollars in damages. Security assistance to Ukraine increased further during the Donald Trump administration, alongside continued pressure on Russia over its involvement in eastern Ukraine. In January 2018, the United States imposed new sanctions on 21 individuals, including a number of Russian officials and 9 companies linked to the conflict. In March 2018, the State Department approved the sale of anti-tank weapons to Ukraine, the first sale of lethal weaponry since the conflict began. In October 2018, Ukraine joined the United States and 7 other NATO countries in a series of large-scale air exercises in western Ukraine. The exercises came after Russia held its annual military exercises in September 2018, which were the largest since the fall of the Soviet Union. The conflict in Ukraine risks further deterioration of US-Russia relations and greater escalation if Russia expands its presence in Ukraine or into NATO countries. Russia's actions have raised wider concerns about its intention elsewhere in Eastern Europe, and a Russia incursion into a NATO country would solicit a response from the United States as a NATO ally. The conflict has heightened tensions in Russia's relations with both the United States and Europe, complicating the prospects for cooperation elsewhere, including on issues of terrorism, arms controls, and a political solution in Syria.